Great. Wonderful to see
Change the
you.
world.
Nice to have you here.
After I introduce you, I'm going to go back, and the reason I'll be on my laptop is I'm not multitasking. I'm going to be,
Yep.
Good afternoon, everybody. Whoa, that was a little louder than I expected. Sorry, I didn't mean to scare anybody. Thank you all for coming. I am Sean Fisher. I'm the pastor here of Bloomfield Congregational Church, and it is my blessing to be here with you today. Welcome to everybody who is here in person, and hello everybody who is out there on the stream. I will be talking with you after I make the introductions here. This is something that is incredibly important to me. It is incredibly important to a lot of people. I've just seen too much of people who I love who have had choices that are important to them taken away from them that has just caused incredible pain. This church doesn't have a position on this. I'm speaking of my own personal free will here, but it is our blessing as a community partner to be able to have presentations like this. Whether it is this or you have something else going on in your community that you want to have a space, we welcome you and anybody out here to have access to the church, have access to the sanctuary, to be able to have presentations and do things as a part of the community. So I would like to introduce my very good friend, who many of you already know, Reverend Davida Foy-Crabtree, who is a good friend of mine, the former conference minister of the state of Connecticut for the United Church of Christ, and a community activist and someone who is beloved here in Bloomfield Congregational. So, Davida, thank you for organizing this, and thank you for everybody else who's a part of this.
Good to Mary Beth. She's next. Well, welcome everyone, and welcome to those who are online with us. This is a really important issue. It took a lot for me to decide to step forward and say, I favor this bill. And I did so because I feel that I have an obligation to all the people I have pastored, at whose bedsides I have sat during the process of dying. So many of them pleaded with their families in anguished ways, asking, help me, I want to go, it's time to go. Why is this going on so long? I'm hurting, I'm suffering, etc. And they have all blended together in my mind. So I can't quote particular individuals in the ways in which they phrased it, but it was very clear in instance after instance after instance, particularly in the 11 years that I served as a local church pastor. In that congregation, for some reason, I was incredibly tuned in, and pastors do this. We get tuned in, and I would show up without anybody calling me. I just knew somehow that I needed to be present. And so I would arrive at a hospital bed or a bed at home, and the family would burst into tears and say, he's asking us to kill him. He's asking us to help him die. And their anguish and their suffering, that there was no way that they could help. And almost invariably, the person, when I went into their bedside, and this could be some months before they actually died, or it could be near the time of death, would plead with me, their pastor, help me, can't you help me? They won't help me, won't you help me? And it broke my heart. I could not have helped in any case because I'm not medical. I don't have that capacity. But it was clear to me that the anguish was profound and that the need in that moment was great. It seemed to me, with virtually every one of these that I attended, each of those individuals was of a good, clear mind. They knew what they wanted. I had not seen signs of depression in them. What I saw was anguish. Anguish is different than depression. Yes, some of them, I think, had deep concerns about the impact this long, drawn-out, dying, and painful process was having on their families and their loved ones. But mostly they were ready to go, and they were in pain, they were suffering. So that's why I'm here today. When I saw that we had a bill this year that had all the provisions I would want to hope for in it to protect against any possible ways in which it might be misused, I said, I've got to speak up. And people often say to me, how could you, a religious leader, argue for this? And I have my answers, and we can come to some of those later. But first, we want you to see this amazing excerpt from a documentary, and I'd like you to meet Mary Beth Abrams from Glastonbury, who is a documentary filmmaker. And why don't you tell a little bit of the story, and then we'll watch a 9-minute excerpt from a documentary that will be out, we think, next fall. Thanks, Mary Beth.
Thank you, Davida, Reverend. So, hi, everyone. I knew nothing about this subject. However, a very close friend of mine that was terminal with cancer knew a lot about it, to the point that she was advocating for it very, very heavily in the latter years of her life. Just to give you a little context, she just passed away a few months ago. Her name is Kim Hoffman. And like I mentioned, I've been very, very close with her for like at least 20, 25 years. So I would hear from her that, that this legislation was something that she was hoping to become law in the state of Connecticut. She wanted to have the option to be able to end her life on her own terms after all these years of cancer treatments really controlling her life to a large degree. And as she got closer and closer to the end of her life, and last year when the legislation was in Connecticut, it didn't pass, and she was very disappointed, and then it was coming up again in 2022, she was getting angrier and angrier. And I was talking with her one day, and I work for a very small independent film company, and I knew that she wanted to kind of take it to the streets, so to speak. She started saying, I'm going to go to that such and such's, that legislator's front lawn, and I'm going to go there, and she's going to see what's going on with me. And I said, well, you know what, Kim? I said, if you really want to do that, I'll go with you. I'm there to support you, whatever you want to do. And then I thought, and you know what? If I bring a camera person, I'll bet there'll be a lot more people that'll be there with you as well. Well, she never did go to so-and-so's front yard and do all that kind of stuff. That was a little bit, that was just sort of her thinking out loud. And she did get very sick. I don't know if she would have been able to do that anyway. But I did end up starting to film her. What we wanted, we started filming in the fall, and we wanted to create an educational tool, a short film that could be used during the legislative process to come, starting, the bill just came up in Connecticut in the beginning of February. So we wanted to work really quickly to come up with something that we could show people, and it would be able to facilitate discussion about this subject. After producing that, and that's what you'll be watching actually in a couple of minutes, after producing that, we have been continuing to film, though, for the long version that we'll have come out at the end of the year. And that long version is really going to dive into the subject. Why are some people opposed to it? What are the things that they say? What do we say to that opposition? What do ethicists say? What do religious leaders say? Reverend Davida is in it as well, or will be in it. And what do doctors have to say about this? So we've interviewed many people, and that will come out at the end of the year. But Right now, we'll be able to show the 9-minute version that we created rather quickly, and I won't say any more about it, but we'll be able to talk afterwards, okay?
No one wants to deal with suffering. Who the heck would want to deal with suffering? Nobody wants to deal with suffering. And you sure don't want to have to see someone you care about suffer. You can take pain medication. It'll be okay. You'll be fine. You won't feel pain. And then I don't have to worry about you feeling pain, or I don't have to feel pained that you're feeling pain. People need to believe the people dying aren't going to suffer. I was diagnosed in June 2013 with stage 3C ovarian cancer. At that point, it was estimated that I would live 3 to 5 years. Now, the cancer is in my liver, it's in my lung, it's in my breast, it's on my skin. I can feel and see a lot of lesions. They're uncomfortable, they're painful, sometimes repulsive to me.
I've seen her struggle for 8.5 years through chemotherapy, through the pain of that, the nausea of that. It's very hard to watch somebody you love being in so much pain and feeling helpless. There wasn't anything I could do.
You know, when it comes to talking about things like pain at the end of life or medical aid in dying or dying in general, I would have to say that unfortunately our medical system and our society in general is really not comfortable talking about the tough stuff, the things that don't go well, the sadness that we are all gonna die. And unless you're willing to face that, or when you're willing to face that, you also then have to face the reality that everybody's suffering is unique, and that the truth is, despite our best tools, we can't always manage it well.
I can tell you that I was in the hospital for 2 days last week because I had a really, really, hopefully acute bout of severe pain. And I spent that time in the hospital on a regular dosage of Dilaudid, which is pain medication, and some Ativan. And it relieved the pain to the point where I was able to sleep. We could have increased the dose, and maybe it would have alleviated more of the pain. But I can tell you, if we increased the dose, I wouldn't know what the pain was, probably, because on the dosing I was on, all I did was sleep. You gotta figure this is not going in a good direction. What it would take to completely relieve pain would just mean to basically put me in a conscious coma, essentially. It's certainly not a life I want. It's certainly not a life my family wants for me, or that I want my family or friends to have to know about or experience. And then again, it gets to that emotional, spiritual, psychological pain.
It might be perceived to be the case that there is some sort of ethical quandary when we allow medical professionals to prescribe a lethal dosage of a drug at the end of someone's life. Of course, because the thought is that medical professionals should be fixing people, they should be helping them, they should be doing no harm. But I think we need to ask questions about what constitutes harm here, right? It's vitally important that we don't regard harm solely as being promoting life at all costs. But we need to extend this notion of harm to recognize that harm can constitute doing things against people's will. Harm can constitute forcing someone to live in what they view to be an undignified sort of manner. Harm can be forcing someone to suffer greatly at the end of their life when they've got a terminal prognosis and they don't want to suffer anymore.
So, what's going on with you these days? What's the latest?
Yeah, latest, nothing's good. Nothing's good. Really bad PET scan this week. It showed a lot of significant progression. So it seems like any of the organs that hadn't been involved are vying for slot. Possibly we're waiting for further assessments to be done. Brain involvement. Left untreated, the brain lesion won't kill me. It'll just further debilitate me, like to the point of really not being able to take care of myself.
If it's true that her communication will be lacking, Kim is a very good communicator now.
A little
Very
chatty sometimes.
Yeah. So that'll be difficult in itself, knowing what she's going to need.
How are you going to understand my jokes if I can't tell
That's
them?
true. That's true. Yeah. It's hard to even think about it. I don't know. We don't know what to expect, but it's just, I think the scary part is the unknown. And how long she has to suffer.
There is a definite cost of legislative inaction that will be paid for by people who face terminal illness like Kim right now. When these bills fail, for some, it's a sentence to intolerable suffering. And knowing that when I say that, I might not be able to have that same conversation with them the following year.
I didn't fight, this disease this long to not live. I've been fighting and keeping alive to live, to contribute to society. Since my diagnosis, I worked for another 6.5 years. I've taken care of my father a bit. I've tried to take care of my wife the best I can when I can. I've done my best to continue having a life.
She never stops living. I just hope that she has that option to go the way she wants to. She's given so much of herself to think of others. It's time some others stepped up and vote for this bill.
So taking narcotics, or the level of narcotics that one would have to take, takes away that ability to cognitively experience, or in any way experience that connection. Ouch. It's not a life. It's no longer life. You're already in the process of dying. You're already in that death process. So what do we want that to look like? And who gets to choose that? Who should be dictating that? I don't want someone dictating what my end of life should be. This is my life. I should get a say in that.
I always Sometimes I get a little teary. Sometimes I get a little teary.
No one wants to deal with suffering. Who the heck would
You
want to
can,
deal with suffering?
Great. I'm going to hand it over to Tim Appleton from Compassion and Choices.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. It's a great question. Why, if the polls are right, 75% of Americans really support aid in dying. Those are in Gallup polls, and then when you poll here in Connecticut, it's the same. It's because the legislative process is an arduous one. We all are probably familiar with polling regarding reasonable measures of gun safety. And those poll even higher at 85%, and yet still, it's difficult to get those laws passed as well. To be particular here in the state of Connecticut, we have to do more to make sure people understand what these bills are and what they're not, what they do and what they don't do. And that can take time. And unfortunately for people like Kim and so many others, they don't have time to come back next year. We're highlighting one story today with Kim, but I've been doing this for 10 years, and I've been to Seabury Village before and talked to people there, perhaps to some of you before. And if it's Kim Hoffman this year, who died about, I guess it was 3 weeks before the bill was heard in the Public Health Committee this year. Last year, in the years past, another dear friend of mine, Mike Mazzone, died, who testified before the Public Health Committee. Prior to that, Sarah Myers died of ALS in 2015 and testified twice in support of this legislation. Another UCC minister, we talked about Sadat Belgobin. He was very supportive of this legislation, and he died without this option as well, of cancer, several years ago. So the answer, you're asking a great question, and the answer is we collectively, myself, Compassion and Choices, and why we're here today asking for your help to better educate lawmakers in support of this bill. In fact, this coming Monday, the Judiciary Committee of the General Assembly will meet and decide the fate of this bill. Mary Beth and I have been working together probably since before, I don't know, Mary Beth, like since November as part of this campaign, and it all comes to a head this coming Monday. And if you have the time and the inclination, we have a sign-up sheet here. If you support this bill, I'll be more than happy to send you some names of members of this committee that after you go home today, I'd like you to call, write, and email. Today is Saturday. Call today, or email today, email again tomorrow, and call on Monday and leave a message directly to them. And if you do that, and you get 5 or 6 other people to do it as well, our ability to pass this law improves. But if we don't, it won't. These lawmakers need to hear from us, and they need to hear from us right now. So that's a really long answer to your short and concise question. And I'm not sure if it completely answered it, but that's what I have.
When did it become the privilege of the state to tell me about what I can do with my own life?
It's another great question, and I'm going to try to answer it. I'm going to try to answer it in a different way. What lawmakers are saying who are opposed to aid in dying is, we don't want to sanction anything. We don't want to sanction this. But by not acting, to your point, they are sanctioning the suffering of Kim Hoffman at end of life, who wanted this option. So if we are truly going to think about this from a libertarian perspective, a perspective of freedom, the passage of this bill would provide freedom for those who don't want to do this. They don't have to. And for those that do, they would have this option. I don't know directly what started it all, but we're here now. And you bring up a good point. Right now, because this law doesn't exist in Connecticut, the government is choosing winners and losers. And that shouldn't be the way it is, because that's what happens in Middletown, Connecticut right now. An end-of-life journey in Middletown, Connecticut is completely different from an end-of-life journey in Middletown, New Jersey, where this law is available. There are more options in New Jersey for a patient like Kim than Kim had here in Glastonbury, Connecticut. And there's another terminally ill person I know who lives in Middletown, Connecticut, which makes this all the more relevant to me.
There are also people, part of the reason I decided to get involved is that one of my, you're not supposed to have favorites, but one of my favorite clergy couples in the UCC both had pretty questionable diagnoses after their retirement, and they so wanted to be able to take this option that they moved away from their family and their friends all the way to Oregon in order to be in a position in which they could avail themselves of this option. That's cruel. That is absolutely cruel, that people would have to move away from their support systems in order to be able to exercise an option. The other comment I want to make that comes through to me every time, and thank you for your documentary, I can't wait to see the whole thing, is the degree to which Kim makes the point that for her, the option of alleviating the pain over years meant that she could not have the fullness of life. So medical aid in dying is aid during the process of dying. It is not taking a life in the midst of the fullness of life. And there are scare tactics that are being used out there that talk about this as assisted suicide, talk about this as, in all kinds of ways. And as a pastor and an ethicist, a moral theologian, I have to say, the reality of life is complex. And simple black and white is unusual. Most of life is gray or striped at the best. And so therefore, we all have to be able to think with sensitivity about the choices that we want to have available to us. I don't know whether I would use the option if life in dying would get so awful that I would want to use the option. But I want the option. I want to know that when this occurs, if this occurs to me, and the older I get, the closer I get, we all know that, I want this option. And I know that that's true for many of you as well. I wonder if you would say something about the provisions of the bill, particularly the provisions, the ethical standards.
Sure. The legislation has numerous different safeguards. You must be an adult. You must be a resident of the state. You must be deemed by an attending physician and a referring physician to be not only terminally ill with less than 6 months to live, but also mentally capable and able to self-ingest medication. Those two physicians can't be in the same practice. Those two physicians can't be heirs to your estate. These requests that you make are multiple requests. You have to make 2 written requests for aid in dying. There is a 15-day waiting period in between your first request and your second request. And those written requests have to be witnessed by 2 people the first time around and 2 separate people. So a total of 4 witnesses have to attest to your written requests, and none of those 4 can also be heirs to your estate. Those are the top line safeguards that, when someone asks me what safeguards exist, those are the ones that I am most familiar with. But there are probably a few more when you dig deep into the 22 pages of it. But those safeguards exist for a reason. And that reason is, one of the reasons is, I can stand up before you and say, there has not been a single case of abuse, misuse, or coercion in the 24 years this law has been in practice in Oregon, and in the many years in 10 other states that includes Washington, D.C. So it's as a result of those safeguards that in those 24 years across these 10 states and Washington, D.C., only 5,000 people in total in that entire time have ingested this medication. 5,000. In Connecticut every year, about 30,000 people die annually prior to COVID-19. I think those numbers, unfortunately, might be a little higher now. But this is I guess the reason I'm saying it is that very few people qualify for aid in dying in the first place. Fewer still are interested in aid in dying. Fewer still, again, start these conversations with their physicians to access aid in dying. Fewer still have the conversations with their physicians and their family members and faith leaders if they have them, and go through the process and get the prescription. And once you get the prescription, 60% of people who gain access to the prescription take the medication. About 40% die naturally, but they know that if things get too difficult, they have a means with which to conquer, in most cases, the cancer that is actively killing them. Most of these patients, when you look at all the data, have cancers. Some have some neurodegenerative illnesses, like ALS is the next most used category. And I know this because many states put out detailed studies every single year about who accesses these laws. It's probably one of the most studied and managed public health policies in the country. Sure.
Kim's motivate, when you were just talking about the percentage of people who gain access to the prescription but don't even necessarily take it. Kim's motivation for wanting the option of medical aid in dying stemmed from her own mother dying in a lot of pain, despite being on all the pain medications. For whatever reason, her mother was one of those people where the pain medication just didn't work, and it was very traumatic for Kim and the rest of her family. And genetically speaking, Kim had concerns that the same thing would happen to her, and her doctors even agreed, like, given her genetics, she might not actually respond to the pain medication the way that it would be hoped. And that was her motivation, and she had a lot of anxiety as she got closer and closer to the end of her life that the pain was not going to be controllable. And had she known that the option existed, if she could have had that prescription waiting for her at the pharmacy or waiting for her in her own medicine cabinet, she would have lived the very end of her life very, very differently. She probably would have enjoyed each moment a little bit more. She was actually a person who really did enjoy life tremendously, but having that level of anxiety it didn't have to be like that. So people will sometimes ask me, do you think that Kim would have taken the drug if she had the option to? And honestly, I don't know. She probably would have. I don't know, but to me, that's not even the point. She wanted to know that it was there for her peace of mind. And I think that that's a really, really huge, important aspect of this legislation, is being able to have something to give the peace of mind. And then maybe you'll take it and maybe you won't. Yes?
Would you not think it's more important for some of us to go to the state capitol and have our say in person? rather than, and I have one more question. I mean, there are several ways that you can commit suicide,
Yes, right, of course.
which, I mean, could you not suffocate yourself? Or be in a bathtub, turn on your hairdryer, and poof. The only problem might be, it may not be enough, and then you are a vegetable. On the other hand,
Yeah,
if
that's-
you're a vegetable,
that's
you
one
may
of the
not
things
know
I
what's
was-
going on.
One of the things I was going to say is that I've had this conversation intimately with probably 30 or 40 people, and the vast majority of them have a plan. The problem is that nobody trusts that their plan will work, and they are so afraid that they will end up being more of a burden in the end because they won't take.
We then need the plan that the Simsbury couple had.
What was that?
We need the plan that the Simsbury couple had. There was
Yes,
a couple
yes,
in
yeah.
Simsbury that
Yeah.
both died
Yeah.
of their own hand.
But it's very difficult, and part of the reason I support this legislation is that it should not have to come to that. We should be able to have medical aid in knowing that the conclusion of our lives will be with dignity, not with an attempt to suffocate ourselves or take meds that we've accumulated over 20 years and that are, who knows whether that will work and what it will do to us. And those are the conversations I've had with people.
Maybe somebody could give you a prescription.
So, but let's talk
So one
about
of the-
going to the
yeah,
Capitol.
Yes. And one reason why I didn't, say it outright from the very beginning is we are all not only different people in different places, but also because of COVID-19, you need to make your own decisions whether or not you feel it's comfortable to go up to even the Capitol. So yes, if you want to join us on Monday, please do so. The meeting begins. The meeting begins at around 10 o'clock in the morning, and it would be wonderful to have supporters of Aid and Dying there, if that's what you'd like to do. But I want to make sure we're careful about our own health, and I don't want to make things worse by trying to make things better. To answer your question directly, and the other, I am also, one of the things that this law does is it brings something that you're describing out of the darkness and into the light and makes it safe. Sorry. I know people who have done what you're describing and helped someone along. And they end up in the criminal justice system, not sued, but prosecuted. A gentleman I know in Southbury, Tom Meyer, carries a felony plea of manslaughter in the death of his mother. And he needed to spend every dollar he had to stay out of prison. And his only thing that he did was cut up medication his mother had been hoarding and help her ingest it. He testified in 2015 in a public hearing, and he said, my choices were following my mother's dying wish or following a law that I didn't feel was right. And I would strongly caution anyone to engage in that, because you are putting your liberty at risk. And I know saying that is very, very difficult because of the very, very difficult choices we all have to make. We are all of a certain generation here, it looks like, that understands the extreme measures women would go through to exercise their own bodily autonomy in the face of an unwanted pregnancy. The same thing is happening with this issue, and I know several people who've ended up prosecuted. So I'll just leave that there.
Ostro wanted to ask.
So one of the major factors that made it possible for 10 other states
states to have similar legislation? And which of those factors are missing in Connecticut?
That's a great question. Your question is, what do the other states do that we haven't done yet? It takes, on average, in a legislative fight, in these legislative fights on aid and dying, about 15 to 20 years to pass these laws. Yeah. So,
Right.
I used to be young and thin when I started this, and I agree with you 110%. So the trite answer to your question is time. We are doing here in the state of Connecticut everything these other states have done, but it really takes time. I've worked with lawmakers who are yes on aid and dying, and it took 10 years for them to get there. 10. I've worked with other lawmakers, and it's taken 5. Other lawmakers, it takes 1 or 2. Some lawmakers are now supportive of aid and dying, not because of these powerful stories that Mary Beth is talking about, our dear friend Kim Hoffman, but these lawmakers, have to live the experience themselves. Well, it was only when I had a difficult death of my father, after years of opposition, that I became to realize, hey, maybe there's something here. When that father is begging, as Davita's experience is, begging them to help them die. Oh, well, now I get it, lawmaker says. And it takes time for people who don't like to talk about death and dying in the first place to really commit to the learning it takes to get to this place of support if they're not already there. And that takes time.
Gentleman back there.
To go back to this lady's question about taking another person's life is generally considered illegal. So this is just an offshoot of that, which should be an exception. The issue, you look around, you notice the generation who's here. If our kids and our grandchildren were active, but I've talked to our local senator, and he seemed to say, well, it's one of the things. He put out a questionnaire. I don't know if any others got it. My wife got one. It had a list of 12 or 13 issues that he wanted your input on. This was not one of them. So it's 75% or 80% or whatever the number of the people may support it, but it's not at the top of their list. And if it's not at the top of their list, and as you say, it can come at the top of your list once you experience it, but people are in favor of it, but they're not so dedicated to it or so anxious, so whatever, enthusiastic about it, that it becomes a top of the list and they go after their politicians with it. So I've talked to our politician, I've written a letter to the current, but it's not something, as you say, not only people don't like to talk about it, until you get to be our age, you don't think about it a whole lot.
I'm not.
Thank you, Roger. I couldn't tell it was you behind the mask. I want to stress the importance of making those phone calls and sending those emails today and tomorrow. There's a chance that we can make it happen this year with the Judiciary Committee. If it comes out of Judiciary, we believe that we have the votes on the floor. We're not absolute on that, but we believe we have the votes on the floor. So this weekend is what really matters, to make contact. None of them are our representatives or senators. But that doesn't matter. They're there for the people of Connecticut, and they need to hear from all of us.
How soon can we get those names?
As soon as I go home and translate please write legibly on the clipboard. It'll help you get them faster. Please write legibly on the clipboard with your email address. It'll help me get them to you faster.
And if you don't get them, I have them.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Well, why don't you just send them around?
If I can remember who's here. See, it'll be easier to do it this way.
Just send it to the end of life choices group.
Oh, do you want to do that, Davita?
I can do that, but you should still do it.
Yeah, we'll still.
Okay, yeah, sure. That'll be cool. We'll
I
both
don't mean
do
to
it.
make work for you, but,
No.
I never know with our listservs at Seabury, and some of you are not on that listserv, so.
Right.
Is that a question over here?
Thank you.
I actually have a quick comment and a very quick question. My comment is that I have memory of being asked by my grandmother, who was very ill in a nursing home with no hope of things getting any better, to help her end her life. I know firsthand what it means to have to tell a loved one, no, I can't help you. It is the worst feeling in the world. Because I have that experience, I'm really curious to know, will they be taking public comment on Monday?
No.
Are signs allowed in the gallery?
No.
So, do you have any suggestions for how we can make them know we're there in
Right.
support of the bill?
Yes. Wear yellow, come to me, and I'll give you literature, and we'll make sure that we're seen. Okay? There's no perfect way to do it. The time for public comment was back in February. I think it was February 24th. That was the public hearing. And to your point, sir, we had a record amount of testifiers this past year of all ages, including a young woman, Kira Phillips, whose home became a crime scene when her mother, 3 days before legislative session ended last year, took her own life instead of facing a difficult end-of-life journey with cancer. So there are people, both young and old, of all different stripes here in the state of Connecticut, that support this legislation, and that number keeps growing. So yes, I'll be there on Monday. Find me, wear yellow, I'll give you some literature, and if there's any way I can point out a lawmaker who we need to get supportive of this bill, I'll say, go talk to that person right over there. Okay? I'll be more than happy to do that for you. And what is really difficult in a short session year, as we are this year, is that our ability to meet up. I mean, we put out a call. You remember, Davida, we put out a call, hey, legislative session is on this day, come on up. We had like 10 or 15 people do so, and we lobbied individually about 20 or 30 different lawmakers that day. We had one of those opportunities. So, unfortunately, we won't have more.
We should also be able to talk to people who might be against that bill.
Yeah.
Because maybe we can convince them.
I'm not exactly sure we're going to have time to take people who are not supportive of this bill, who are lawmakers, on that journey in a single hour or two. I would rather we speak directly to, and this is where Kim was really effective. I would say, Kim, talk to this lawmaker, and this lawmaker, and come back and let me know what they say. And of the 3 that I gave her to do, 2 came away and went from opposed to supportive, and they're both now co-sponsors of this legislation because of Kim. And one was was it Sisyphus rolling the rock up the hill? Was likely the person that she wanted to camp out in front of their house. And she would call me and, you know, like she called you. And Mary Beth was the person saying, I'll go there and I'll do it. And I was like, I'm not sure you should do that. So we did our best to be dear friends of a dear, dear person, especially, you know, Mary Beth. You know, I got to know Kim in the last, 2 years of her life. Mary Beth has known her for over 20. And I will say that watching this 10-minute piece, not only do you see the love between Joy and Kim so beautifully shot and captured, but I got to tell you, you also see the love Mary Beth has of Kim. Yeah. And thank you for doing that.
One comment I would want to make is that some of you might be a little nervous about calling a legislator that you don't know. I want to just share my own experience, which is that they really do want, most of them, not all, most of them, they really do want to hear what we think, and what is most important are not erudite arguments. What's most important is a story, a personal testimony, And you have that uniquely, each of you. And that's what can make a difference. And the list that Tim has are, I believe, the members of the Judiciary Committee that we think we can get to, but we really need the calls and emails to go to. It's not the full list of the Judiciary Committee, and it doesn't include the people who have already said yes or absolutely no. Am I right?
That's right.
These are swing possibilities, so this is crucial. Libby.
When you call somebody in Washington, you don't get the person, of course, you get an aide. In this case, do we talk to the legislators, or do we talk to some secretary?
Yeah. I was a former aide in the General Assembly here, and the best advocates treated the aides as if they were the lawmakers themselves. Right. So
Probably will not be talking to the lawmakers.
you may or you may not, but if you get the aide, make sure you treat them with the same respect and make the point and say, I'm calling in support of Senate Bill 88. It's my understanding this lawmaker is on the Judiciary Committee, and I want to make sure they know that it's a very important issue for me. And if there's any opening, as Davida said, tell the reason. You beautifully crafted an answer to a lawmaker. I have heard firsthand a loved one of mine beg me for assistance in death, and the trauma I feel as a result of not being able to help them made me call you today. That's it. No one can deny
Right.
or call that fake your experience. If you call and say statistics, and here's this, and here's that, all that stuff I said, that's fake news, they'll say. We can argue that. But no one can deny a personal experience of someone who has lived a particular issue. And that's what made Kim so good, and that's what makes this movie so good. This documentary so good, is Kim was living and breathing this very issue right up until the moment she died. One of the pieces of information we have here, she used probably 2 or 3 weeks before she died, I think, she was interviewed by nationally syndicated columnist George Will, the conservative guy. And
Great article.
George Will supports aid in dying, and that was published in the Washington Post the very day she died. The very day she died. So, real stories of real people, and finding the stories and expressing them and lifting up these voices is another reason why it takes so long for these bills to pass. And connecting with the right people.
In conclusion, I just want to say that one of the issues that I think is circulating around this issue is the sacredness of the time of dying. And speaking as a faith leader, a religious leader, an ordained clergy person, the sacredness of that moment and the intrusion of the state into controlling it is a significant issue. It is a moral issue. And the state attempting to control the way in which those of us who believe differently than some who are absolutely opposed on religious grounds are not allowed to exercise our faith and to live our lives in the way in which we believe is true and correct. And I'm not a lawyer, and I can't make constitutional arguments, but it is so close to the establishment of one particular faith perspective that I have to object to it. And that is a part of the reason I decided I had to come out, because as a former conference minister of the United Church of Christ, I have a unique perspective on that. And that is to say, I am glad that there are faith communities who are so clear and absolute black and white on this particular issue. That's good. That's for them. That's what they teach. But their teaching should not be imposed on the rest of us who see more gray and more stripes and more subtlety and more complexity in life than they are seeing. So for me, this is, yes, personal, because I could tell the story of my own husband for this. I can speak pastorally, but I also have to speak as a religious leader and say, without question, this is really questionable failure to act on the part of the state. And we need to get the state out from between patient and doctor. Right, exactly. So thank you all, and thank you to the Congregational Church of Bloomfield for hosting us and making this possible. Thank you, Keith, for your work, and thank you to everyone who is with us online or on video. And I hope that you really will send the email, make the phone call, both, and get some others to do so as well.
It's the weekend. I have a lot of jobs when I get home. This is one of them.
And thank you to both of you for this incredible dedication to this.